Welcome to 3-Night Weekend, where we prepare you for the weekend to come with the help of gaming industry luminaries. I'm Shane Satterfield, and you can find me on the world's most advanced gaming website, Sifted, at sifted.net, or on Twitter at Dinfire. If you want to support the show, head to patreon.com/sifted. The show goes live every Friday morning for our patrons, and the following Monday for everyone else. This week, we're talking to Greg Kasavin. He was the editor-in-chief at GameSpot during its glory days, moved to work at publishers like EA and Take-Two before landing at Supergiant, the studio behind Game of the Year candidate Hades. All right, and here we are with a person I would consider one of my mentors in the gaming industry. We're speaking with Greg Kasavin, one of my very first bosses in games journalism. Greg, welcome to 3-Night Weekend.
Hey, Shane, thank you for having me on here. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, I just want to say before we get going that the things that you taught me, I was a fresh out of college with a journalism degree, and the things that you taught me in my first couple years in the industry have paid dividends in a lot of ways across the years. The ideals that you kind of taught me about how to handle games editorial have sustained throughout my entire career. I would say that it was more successful in the early days than it is now. I feel like editorial integrity is something that's not as important as it used to be back when we worked together. But that's a whole different discussion. We want to talk about you today. You have had an amazing journey through the games industry. You were the editor-in-chief of GameSpot when I worked there. And then you moved on to work in game development, which isn't, at the time, it was kind of a new thing. But since then, it has become almost kind of a normal career path. Honestly, it's kind of crazy how it's worked out that way. I have not followed that path. I've talked to too many of you guys to know I want nothing to do with game development. So I've continued to cover games. Greg, let's talk about your early days, though. What got you interested in and involved in games journalism in the first place?
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for that. I think we were really learning as we went in back in those GameSpot days, and it's funny, you hear it's great to hear that it left a lasting impression on you like that. And I sometimes hear from readers once in a while where they're like, oh, those were the days or something. I think if they grew up with PS2s and GameCubes, it's more likely to have left an impression that way. But it's like we were always just kind of it was never a time when you could kind of rest easy. It was so much to do, and our kind of mandate at the time was literally to review every game.
I know
it's unimaginable right now. And granted, I mean the number of games available today is probably like 1,000-fold greater.
At least threefold for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, legitimately, probably threefold.
Yeah, I'm including like mobile games and stuff like that in there.
Yeah,
in my
a lot of us don't even know exist.
Yeah, but it was still a lot, and we had our team was like of a modest size, and we were just
grinding is what we were doing, Greg.
Yeah, that's a good word for it. But to your question, I mean, I'm really I started writing about games like in high school, kind of fresh out of high school. I always wanted to make games since I was a little kid. I was like 8 years old, playing an old RPG called Ultima 4, kind of the great grandfather, I would say, of it's still like modern Western RPGs, like whatever Bethesda games and Witcher and stuff like that. I think owe a lot to the Ultima series. And it blew my mind that there could be this, big kind of open world game where your choices have consequences. You could kind of do whatever you want, go wherever you want. It was just amazing to me. But I played all sorts of games. I was lucky to have, access to, I play arcade games, console games, whatever I could get my hands on. And I was playing games like so much in high school that it started to, I think a combination of guilt, maybe a little parental pressure, and like I need to do something productive with this. but my attempts to teach myself programming just were not successful. I tried over the years multiple times. It's just, I don't know, my brain did not feel wired for it, which I think is probably a bit of a fallacy. Like anyone can learn programming if you kind of put your mind to it. But
it's easier now than it was back then.
Maybe so. Yeah, for sure. Aspects of learning game development are easier now when you could just like download Unity or something and start doing
Yeah.
tutorials and making stuff happen.
You don't have to do
But
everything from scratch now.
yeah, yeah, indeed. But I loved writing, and so I got to I started basically I was on the fledgling internet at the time. I met a friend across the country, similar kind of tastes and interests in games, and we started making like a little fanzine, like an actual printed,
Like
printed on paper.
paper.
Yeah, yeah, mailed to people, via snail mail, with like game reviews and stuff like that. And that led me to my first, like basically my first job was at a publication called New Type Gaming, that very fortunately was in San Francisco. So I lucked out like a lot of it. I attribute a lot to luck because I was living, going to school
You
in
made
San
a
Francisco.
fanzine that you printed on paper, Greg. I don't think it's luck, buddy.
Well, the part
you had
the part where
dedication to do that.
here's the part that is crazy luck. So I had these kind of initial little writing gigs, as like, whatever, I was probably 17 at the time. And I'm starting to kind of mess around on, I'd been part of the internet, like already, publications were starting to transition from print to, having an online presence.
Mm-hmm.
I hear about something called GameSpot, and they're launching, instead of these small little kind of hobbyist websites, somebody's launching kind of a gaming website for real. They've got a real team. They've got former editors from like Next Generation magazine, editors with clout.
Yeah.
And it turned out that GameSpot's headquarters was like basically only like a 30-minute walk from where I was living. So that part was really serendipitous. It was just kind of down on, I still pass by the old, the first office from time to time. So I reached out to them, and basically it led to an internship there. Even I tried to make myself, bigger than I was, and had some writing samples to show for myself, and they're like, oh, what, you interested in an internship? It was actually like a paid internship, which was amazing, even for the time. And so I started like making basically kind of my first real job, getting to review games and stuff like that. And I was in college at UC Berkeley at the time. I was very tempted to drop out, because things were going well for me at GameSpot, and I was really like excited about that work. And meanwhile, college was rough.
What was your major?
I majored in English.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so not journalism, but kind of a related writing focused major. And my own, the person I consider my own mentor there at the time, Ron Doolin, he encouraged me to essentially to stay in school. The job would be there, when I was done.
Mm-hmm.
And
great
and that's
advice.
yeah, it was. I learned, in turn, whatever kind of values you mentioned that I espoused, I think I took a lot of that from Ron.
So in some ways, he was kind of my mentor too.
For sure. I think,
That's how it works, though. And I passed what you taught me down to a lot of editorial folks that were working under me across the years. That's how it goes,
Yeah, for sure. It's like you kind of come into those situations and your instincts kind of get reinforced by, sometimes it can go the other way, right? Like the kind of, the leadership or whatever, the values, you're like, it just feels wrong. It's like, no, this doesn't seem right at all. But once in a while, yeah, you kind of get to work with somebody who just reinforces what you feel to be.
And what you're taught, in all honesty.
Right.
I had a journalism degree, and I listened to my professors talk about it for 4 years. To work someplace where that was reinforced, it was, first of all, encouraging to me, having spent a lot of time and money in college, to learn that what I had absorbed in school, I could put into practice in my career. It felt good, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that is really good, especially, because I didn't have a formal, I didn't have a journalism background myself. Yeah. And yeah, the fact that, fast forward, basically, I kind of, after I graduated, I went to work at GameSpot full time, and ended up working there for more than 10 years. And it was one of those things where, like, I mean, when I started as an intern, I couldn't have really imagined that I would wind up, editor-in-chief one day and be there for 10 years or whatever. but the time went by really fast. And as you said, it was an intense place to work. There was never really any downtime.
You
I
could
would
never
say.
exhale.
Yeah, even like over the holidays, we'd have to plan our game of the year stuff, and I was typically one of the people to make sure all that stuff went up. And so
But
even
even
around
that, Greg, how we handled our game of the year discussions, that's how we ended up handling our game of the year discussions at all the publications where I was running
yeah,
editorial.
no, that's cool. I have fond memories of those discussions. Actually, they were. I mean, we just pile into a room and
just go
hammer
at
it
it.
out. Yeah,
Yep.
I love we still, some of the folks we worked with, they're still in the kind of in the mix with like a Giant Bomb and stuff like that. And I love that they make the process kind of even more transparent than we did, where they
actually publish the discussion.
Yeah, they record the entire thing, so you have kind of full transparency into the deliberations, which I find is really cool. And I would have been all for something like that. I feel like.
Yep.
But yeah, it's the time went by so quickly that I just I wouldn't have done it for that long if I didn't love it. But I basically did start to feel this kind of anxiety around I'm no closer to getting into game development, and if this is my childhood dream, it's still kind of like sticking with me in an annoying way, and I felt like I had to at least try it. And maybe I'd go, chances are I'd come crawling back or something like that, but I knew I'd regret it if I didn't try it. And yeah, I finally, you remember Amira Jami, right?
Yes.
Like he's from, yeah. So
he was the first to leave for development from
he
GameSpot,
was,
right?
yeah.
He went to EA, correct?
He did did go to, yeah. So Amira Jami was like our previews editor, focused on PC games.
Great guy.
Yeah, he was, and he
still
got
is, I'd imagine.
Yes,
I haven't
he
talked
still
to him
is
for a while.
No, he's doing well, actually. He's there with many. What's awesome is he still works with many of the folks from that same team. After like I at Supergiant, Supergiant was founded by two of the folks from that team, and then I'm there as well. So a small splinter group from that Command and Conquer team went to do Supergiant, but a big chunk of them are still together, which I find is really wonderful, because they've been together now
and
for
rare.
Probably close to 20.
In this industry, it's rare to work with the same people for that long.
Yeah, so they work on they do make mobile game. They work on like Marvel Strike Force stuff, like so pretty actually like very successful mobile games.
I mean, a lot of my friends, those are like their favorite games.
Yeah.
Those mobile, like Star Wars, like turn-based RPGs based on big IP. A lot of my casual friends, that's what they play.
Yeah, that stuff is like, I mean, they're made by really big teams at this point. They're like pretty fancy productions.
They generate a lot of revenue.
Yeah, that too. So it was Amira Jami who like, told me, I stayed in contact with him after he left, and he's like, hey, there's a producer opening on the Command and Conquer team. They were working on Command and Conquer 3 at the time. It's a series I enjoyed a lot, and I applied for it and I got it. And I left at the beginning of 2007. So I've now been in game development for longer than I was in the gaming press. But time is funny that way, and it doesn't time kind of accelerates the older you get, it seems.
It really does. It really does.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like I've been doing this stuff. I think I felt like more proficient in some ways at GameSpot than in game development, where it's like, yeah, it's still it's its own struggle. Kind of it never has felt like it got easier in any way, but it's really.
But don't you think that's compelling?
It is. I think that is at the heart of why it's interesting.
Because I have certainly gotten to a point with covering games where I feel like everything, not just myself, but everything has kind of reached a zenith. Like once we got to the Let's Plays and that type of coverage, things haven't changed that much since then.
That's true. And
it does feel like things are a little bit on autopilot. And you're right, you need new challenges to stay engaged. And it can be tough when everything feels stagnant. And in all honesty, a lot of new ideas that you try in covering games anymore get rejected. Everyone just kind of seems to want the same thing.
Yeah.
Lots of talking head stuff, lots of Let's Play stuff. Not a lot of editorial based stuff, to be perfectly honest with you.
It is interesting, when once you've been around kind of long enough, it is I'm fascinated by the kind of comparison. I make the comparison myself that, when I was getting started, there was a lot of I think there was a lot of like fear from kind of established print publications about these, upstart websites. It's like, what are
Right.
these guys? These guys don't have any, they don't have any values, they don't have any integrity, they don't know what it takes, and so on. And yet websites, started
Took
to
over.
eat the lunch of print publications. They could produce,
The
more.
timeliness.
Yeah, the timeliness was huge,
And video.
they could and video as well, and also just like length.
Yeah.
You could write a review that was as long as it needed to be, instead of like squeezing the whole thing into 600 words or something like
Yep,
that.
it's true.
There's an art to concise writing, of course, but
Absolutely.
but
Yeah.
sometimes I think in our, back in our day, in GameSpot, I think when it's like, oh boy, a 3-page review, for Halo or something like that, people were very excited to dig through, a long
Yeah.
written review.
The
So
more detail, the better. Yep,
yeah,
absolutely.
exactly. So now, of course, when like streaming and let's plays and kind of YouTube started to kind of rise to glory in more recent years, it felt like the old kind of established websites were kind of under attack. I guess the times were changing for them, much like how the times are changing for print publications. I think
That's accurate completely.
yeah,
Now,
and I
Greg,
think similarly, like YouTubers, some of those streamers and stuff I watch, it's like they're some of the hardest working people I've ever
yeah,
seen.
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
I think my big concern coming from where we come from is editorial oversight. Working
Yeah.
with publishers on the side, that sort of thing, when there's no one there to watch what they're doing and make sure that they're kind of following the straight and narrow. There's
Yeah.
wiggle room there that I felt like I didn't have working under you per se. Like,
Right.
knowing that you were
was
there, I minded my P's and Q's at all times. And I would
Yeah.
hope that at the publications where I was the EIC or whatever, that the people working under me felt like, man, I gotta toe the line here, or Shane is gonna bust my balls, So, and you don't get
Right.
that anymore. If you're a YouTuber working from home or whatever, you have nobody kind of watching over your shoulder.
Yeah.
That's kind of a concern to me. But honestly, I don't think the audience cares, and that's really what matters.
Yeah, they're ultimately, they have to figure out where that line is for themselves, and they their audience can smell BS in many cases. So
Mhm.
it is really tough for them, because they have to like figure, there's no one, they have to find either figure it out on their own, or find some kind of mentorship around like how to navigate all that, because I think they're, anyway, as you say, it's a whole it's a whole can of worms and big discussion topic. But
Yeah.
it's a, I my heart goes out to people trying to make it happen in that space, because like I said, they're just so many
Streamers
of them
especially.
yeah, they gotta
No,
7
thanks.
days a week, same time. Like, man,
No,
extremely
thank
hard
you.
working.
That is not for me. I'm way too old for that at this point, Greg.
Yeah, I've been watching the same like Hearthstone streamers now, like for years, and they're they're like part of my whatever, part of my week or something like that. Tune in and listen to these guys. It's that interesting experience of like they almost feel like friends, even though
Yeah,
you've never
absolutely.
met them, like a radio personality
Yeah,
as well.
for sure.
Yeah.
Now, Greg, so you moved over to EA to work on the Command and Conquer team. Were there any immediate regrets of moving into game development where you were like, oh my gosh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be? What have I done? Any feelings like that?
No, I don't think if there was something like that, I think I've like blocked it from my memory. I was pretty fired up about it. I was mentioning, before we started this call, I was actually commuting to Los Angeles from Northern California,
which is
so
brutal.
yeah, it was weird. It was one of those things that I thought was going to be temporary. Oh, it'll be a couple of weeks. Oh, it'll be a couple of months. Oh, it'll be a couple of years.
And it just kept going on.
Yeah, it just kept going on. We never like kind of found a permanent residence down in LA, and and it was just a weird time in the industry where I didn't know, like between projects especially, it's like you don't know what's going to happen,
if you're gonna have a job.
Yeah, or like what your job is going to be, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
After Command and Conquer, I joined at the tail end of Command and Conquer 3, so it was clear what we were rolling onto after that. And then Red Alert 3 was the first game I worked on start to finish. And then we worked on a small expansion pack for it that was done in like 4 months flat, which is
Wow.
amazing to think back on.
That is.
And then from there, things became very murky as to what would be our team's future, despite this team being like it was a very like kind of high performance team that had been belting out these hit games for a while, but things changed. And for me, I think I felt, because of like Amira Jami helped me to meet people there and just helped me kind of navigate this new environment. But it was definitely really scary for me because I'd kind of like not worked in another environment for more than 10 years. So just having to meet a whole new group of people and kind of figure out what makes them tick and all that kind of stuff, that's inherently pretty kind of scary and challenging. But I was very excited also, and I felt like I felt like quite welcome there. It was cool to see how much I didn't know that people kind of I didn't have any assumptions about how like game developers felt about a website like GameSpot or something like that. But
was it interesting getting that perspective from the other side?
It was like I didn't know how much. Oh boy, and this is like, still true.
Did they care?
They care a lot. They cared a lot about Metacritic, which I think is more publicly known now.
Yeah,
but I'm like, man, they really care about review scores.
Well, the bonuses, at least back then, were kind of tied into the scores in some ways at some publishers.
Yeah, I think that was the case at some places. I don't think that was the case on our team, but our team did like value quality, and it was a way to measure, critical consensus, critical quality that they could like, refer to when speaking to an executive or something like that. Like everybody there knew that quality was more than just review scores. But if you make a game that has a whatever 9.0 90 Metacritic, that's like a pretty good indicator.
No, you're on the right track.
Yeah, exactly.
And I would argue back then that Metacritic held a little more weight than it does now, because back then there weren't as many publications. Most of the publications were structured editorial departments with oversight, like the places that we had worked at. Now Metacritic, I'm actually interested to get your perspective on this. Now Metacritic, for each game, there's like 1,000 reviews, whereas back then, literally, there'd be maybe 40 or 50. Which do you think better represents your game, and which way did you like better, having fewer publications or more?
I mean, I think the spirit of things like Metacritic do benefit from like a larger sample size. I've never worked on games that got I don't remember there being a huge numerical sort of disparity between then and now, but I do work on smaller games, so maybe I just don't have as much awareness of games that get like hundreds of Metacritic reviews or something like that. I think there's a lot more kind of international representation on Metacritic, which I think is a good thing. It's just it's more indicative of different points of view. If nothing else,
cultural differences, things like that.
And those are even just like, oh, this game has a busted, translation or something, so it gets worse reviews overseas. It's like that's a valid issue, when comparing games in that way. But I still feel like one of the things I would always think about at GameSpot was like, every high review score makes it harder for the next game to score as high, because the standard literally goes up when a game like Zelda Breath of the Wild or God of War or Uncharted 4, whatever, those games like raise the standards and make it harder for another game to be as like well received.
Greg, I have never given a perfect 10 in my entire career.
Yeah, I never did either.
Not once. I've been doing it for 23 years. I've never given a game a perfect 10.
Yeah, there's always something. I mean, it's like, I agree. I had the same experience. I gave some very high, whatever. Very
me too. I've given lots of 9.5s and higher, but I've never hit that perfect 10.
Yeah. I don't know that I've played such a game either. There are games I love dearly. I could still note. Yeah, just be like, whatever. I can reconcile that. It's like sometimes it's just part of the personality of the game. It might technically be a flaw or something like that, but it's like, that's part of what makes this game interesting in some way, that it has this kind of weird issue that maybe doesn't make sense.
That's a good point.
But anyway, so I think we do, when we release a game, we do look at the Metacritic, not to obsess over it, but just like what did everybody say. I still, coming from that background, I still really value what game critics have to say about our work. It's a good way of gauging, like, as a game developer, what's really useful about reviews is like, what did the things that stood out about your work, were they the things that you actually focused on, or were there things that you were like unconscious to? And so, something I really value is when reviews sort of highlight things that we did indeed focus on deliberately during development. It's like, okay, good, we thought that was important, we put a bunch of stuff into it, and that is indeed what stood out to someone, about the work. But sometimes, a critic may be caught up on some particular detail, and it's like, I never realized that, or I didn't notice that, or like, I hoped that. I think a very frequent response to that, game developers, I think, broadly know what they're shipping. You've seen all sorts of reactions. You just kind of hope that people will be on the more positive side of
glass
the
half
things
full versus glass half empty.
But you don't really know. And so typically when
do you think they are? Do you think game critics generally are glass half full or glass half empty?
I think they're glass half full. Okay. If I have to sort of make a sweeping generalization, because, and that's referring to like the enthusiast press, so to speak, because like that's why like you can't keep doing it for very long if you don't like love games on a fundamental level. And I know, God, I don't think I could have survived in. I know a lot of the discussions around like game criticism, they remind me of the ones that we were having at the time. It's like, just because you gave a game, a less than stellar review, it doesn't mean you don't love games. It often means the opposite. It's like, you can be critical of things you love. You can find problems in things you love. So these are still, I've kind of made peace. I used to get like really frustrated that same discussion would happen over and over, and I made peace with it of like, oh, it's actually kind of generational changes in many cases. It's just like games are, still draw a lot of younger players, and for many players, they like, they're having that realization for the first time, even though, someone like you or I may have had that realization, a couple of decades ago or something.
I mean, that's been a struggle for me as a games critic, is a lot of genres that I've played, like 2D platformers, that I have played just thousands of them at this point.
Yeah.
I really need something new or creative in these games for it to light a spark inside me as the player. But it's very easy to lose sight of the fact that a lot of people who are going to watch your coverage or read your coverage are 13 and they've played 5 of them.
Right.
And that has been a struggle for me, is realizing that not everyone is like me. They haven't been playing games since the 70s. They haven't played a million of these things. And so a lot of the features in these new games aren't new to me, but they are to everybody else, or to a lot of people who are just starting to play. So it's been a challenge. I think that's probably been the biggest challenge for me as someone who's been doing it for a long time, trying to create content for people who maybe are in their teens or early 20s and haven't experienced as many games as I have.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I still, a lot of my own references I think about do come from that, like, either our kind of GameSpot time or the 90s, something. These were the formative experiences for me, playing Super Nintendo games or something like that. And I can still see, echoes of those games in a lot of games I play today. And I think in many cases those are still like the purest examples of certain types of ideas, because they didn't have, much of anything else to go on. So, but to a new player today, they don't have that frame of reference, and we have. It's
you have to calibrate. It's like, how do you do that?
We meet people, even for us, like at Supergiant, we've now been around for more than 10 years, and at PAX or it is, at PAX or something like that, we'll be like, we'll meet like a grown ass adult, but the person will be like, "Oh yeah, I played Bastion in middle school. It was, so memorable." It's like, oh boy, because
That's awesome though.
because the difference between like an 8-year-old and an 18-year-old is like, oh my god, that's your whole
that happens
life.
with us with X-Play a lot.
Yeah,
people are like, I watched that when I was in grade school, and I'm like, oh wow, and you're like in your 30s or whatever.
Well, back to the time accelerating thing, I guess.
Absolutely. So Greg, you ended up leaving EA eventually. Why did you leave EA?
Yeah, I left EA. I left EA to stabilize my life, because I had been commuting for more than 2.5 years, and I found a job opportunity at 2K Games up here in Novato. So 20-minute commute.
Wow.
As opposed
versus
to
6 hours.
Yeah. So that was really, and I was a big fan of 2K. BioShock was a game that left a really strong impression on me at the time. Actually, was one of the games before it came out.
Still leaves a strong impression on me.
That was one of the games that made me. It was like E3 2005.
That sounds right.
Where I think both BioShock and the first Assassin's Creed were unveiled for the first time, and those games they blew my mind seeing those games for the first time, and I felt this like intense that feeling of like I don't know how people are making this stuff. I just want to be a part of something like this someday. So my kind of anxiety around trying to get into game development sparked right back up from seeing those games. But yeah, EA, like our project at EA had also been recently canceled. At that point, it never announced, and we were kind of like, things were kind of flagging for us on that team, and so it seemed like a good time to move on. It was around the same time, actually shortly before, that Amir and Gavin, who were two of my friends and colleagues from that team, had dropped everything and moved up to San Jose, which is about 90 minutes from here in Northern California of a drive, and started Supergiant in the living room of Amir's dad's house, who Amir's dad was not living there at the time. So they basically had a place to live and work. And I had been, Amir was one of my roommates in LA. Like we had been talking about independent games and what we would do for a really long time, and playing these games like Braid and Castle Crashers and Plants vs. Zombies, World of Goo. Those were like the 4 games from small studios that came out in a relatively same time period. And they just were amazing to us, and kind of inspired us to see what could be done as a smaller team. But I wasn't there from the start. I ended up joining them. I didn't feel like, with my whole like kind of family situation and everything, the idea of going from my LA situation to like working at a startup company 90 minutes away
with maybe not a lot of benefits.
Yeah, it was
a kid, and
another. I had already taken. Supergiant became my third successive pay cut. Basically, I took a pay cut for EA, I took a pay cut for 2K, and then at Supergiant, it was all like self-funded, so we basically had no money. I had to mooch off my parents for the first time since I was like 17, and I'm really grateful that I even had that option.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I reunited with them. Basically, I was only at 2K for about a year, and then joined Supergiant just as Bastion was going into full.
What did you work on at 2K, Greg?
I worked on a game called Spec Ops: The Line.
Oh, wow! That's you act like nobody knows what that game is.
I'm glad.
That's a groundbreaking game that's still talked about today.
I love that it has like its kind of cult following. At the time, it was like a. The kind of vision behind it's a game that spent a long time in development. So I sort of deserve very little credit for that game, though I really I was really like excited about the premise of it, and am still friends with some of the folks I worked with on it. It gave me an opportunity to travel to Germany because the developer is Jaeger. They're based in Berlin. So I would visit so I went from commuting to, I spent up to a month in Berlin on that project. So it's still plenty of travel and being away from home, but it did help me stabilize after the EA situation. So yeah, game development it's been a real roller coaster, more than like the highs and lows. I think the lows have been lower for me than at GameSpot, and the highs have I suppose have been higher with something like Bastion and in our subsequent games, because it felt good that as a small team we could make something that um that stood out to people, basically, that we, our sort of our theory, or our it wasn't a theory, it's something we wondered. It's like, could we actually make something worth a damn as a small team? And when the results come in and the evidence is that yes, you made something worth a damn, it's like, oh, awesome. And for me,
now, how far along was Bastion when you came onto the team?
there was we basically had we were just preparing our like 20 minutes PAX demo. There was a lot of the first year was spent on getting like foundational aspects of it to even function, like having a character that you can control and who can swing a hammer when you press a button. But yeah, like the whole, we went to that PAX Prime in 2010 to show the game for the first time, and it got a really, really good, it was a really memorable experience because the game got a great response.
Was the narration in the game already at that
point? The narration was just beginning, basically.
Okay.
So it was not there it was not there as like a foundational part of the game, but sort of like was something that came along through the course of prototyping, where we wanted to tell a story at the player's pace. Was the basic idea. It's like, how can we do that? It seems paradoxical because most games use cutscenes or text boxes and stuff like that. So one day Amir is childhood friends with Logan Cunningham, who's been our voice actor in every game, and he like had him record a few lines, put it in there, and it was like it really did something for the game immediately. And it happened to line up with the story, with the kind of bigger story ideas we had for the game, where we kind of converted the story was always going to involve this kind of mysterious old caretaker at this location called the Bastion. It's like, wait a minute, the whole story could be from this guy's point of view. So I came in to do all the writing and build
Which is
levels.
Great, by the way. Kudos.
Thank you. Yeah. So it's just that was my first shot at.
You knocked it out of the park.
Thank you. I mean, I certainly I was very excited to finally have a chance to do that kind of work. It meant
kind of melding your two worlds together, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I hoped. But of course, it's one of those things where like no one would have given me. I could have never gotten that job had I just applied for it. It took working with a couple of friends who I'd sort of gone through the fire with at EA, and who knew, and I had some opportunities to do some writing at EA. Like I wrote, unit responses and things like that. When you click on the little
you also
dudes,
did some like videos for EA, didn't you?
Yeah, we did like kind of almost like an esportsy kind of thing where I got to do some video.
I remember you hosted some stuff, and I was like, Greg's dipping his toes back in coverage a little bit.
It was fun. But yeah, I always hoped to be able to write characters and help create these worlds and stories and stuff like that. And Bastion was our first stab at that, and then people liked it, so it meant that we could stick around and make another one. Yeah, because it's all it was all just whatever, Amir and Gavin like digging into their savings and stuff like that. But after Bastion, it meant we could become more of like a real studio. We moved out of the house to a place in San Francisco. We started paying ourselves living wages, that sort of thing. So trying to make it a more sustainable endeavor. And I think it was around that time when we're like, hey, let's see. We wanted to see, we continue to want to see how long can we sort of keep it going for. And all 7 of us from the Bastion days, we're all still there, which is something that we feel good about. Because I mean, life
it's a great place to work that people want to stay.
and not only that, it's like, you don't know what curveballs life is going to throw at you. I just count my blessings. It's like, even if it is a great place to work, it doesn't mean that circumstances will be such that everyone can keep doing it. So I'm thankful that we've all been able to stick together. And a lot of these guys, I was kind of the old man of the group relatively at the start, and these guys are like in their early to mid 20s. The difference between being in your early to mid 20s to like your mid 30s, it's a lot of living that happens. And you're in a really different point in your life. So it's like we've had to adapt as a studio to just people's lives changing, because we can't, we were 7 people at the time. We're closer to 20 now, still relatively small. But it's like when you have few enough people like that, you can kind of configure the way you do things around the people specifically. You don't need like blanket policies that have to cover 1,000 people. You just kind of
for instance, you had a kid, they were in their 20s, they probably didn't. They were probably going out more than you at night, enjoying the nightlife around San Francisco. You had a family. You're right, when you're a smaller team and sort of the demands of the lifestyles of each person, you can kind of cater each person's responsibilities around that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And even just things like work hours, it's like just recognizing, and this is something, I had to learn myself along the way. It's like some people can be extraordinarily talented, but maybe they don't kind of work effectively in this sort of like standard structure that may be fine for most people. It's like, if someone does amazing work, but they just can't get going at 9 a.m. or something like that. They really get going at 10 or 11, but then they prefer to work a little bit later. It's like, fine, whatever. and working with and working with people who are these, like our Jen, our art director, Darren, our composer and audio director. I consider them, they're like geniuses in their craft. So it's like, whatever is going to work for you creatively so that you can keep doing your thing, just do it. Like, it doesn't need to be this kind of office-y type of environment when we're trying to do this kind of work. So that, at in our GameSpot days, we were already owned by CNET Networks, and there was this, even though we were like the scrappy group within CNET, there was still some of this, at least some kind of ethereal pressure of like, well, like,
get there at 8 and stay.
Yeah, we want to like appear professional within the organization, so they know what we're all about, all this kind of stuff. Yeah,
I mean, it was like that everywhere though, Greg. It wasn't just us at CNET. That's just work culture. That's the way it was. Exactly. And I think we've seen over the last year, a lot of companies are re-examining that. My wife works for a gigantic corporation, and it's been interesting watching them ebb and flow over the last 12 months. And now they're to the point where they're selling off all the real estate, and they're like, a lot of you guys aren't coming back to the office. You've proven in this year's time, we don't need that office. We don't need that square footage anymore. You can function and do very well working from home if you want to. So it's been a huge culture shift for a lot of people over the last year. It's interesting that you noticed that over a longer stretch of time working in corporate America, really, and then working for more of an independent kind of startup. So you had Bastion was a huge hit. And then your next 2 games, Transistor and Pyre, I'm not sure, honestly, financially how well those games did. But to me, as an outsider playing the games, they seemed almost more experimental than Bastion. Like, maybe you guys had some ideas that you're kind of poking around. You're like, okay, we can make a salary now. Maybe we can take a little bit more risk. I think Pyre of those 2 games was probably the bigger surprise to me. Really a sports game.
Yeah.
And I'm, me, I'm a sports guy. I love sports. I love sports games. I was really surprised at Pyre. What lessons did you guys learn from sort of Transistor and Pyre?
Yeah, we learned a lot from each game, and you're right that there were for us, for sure, there were experimental qualities in these games. I don't consider, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think they're not like that experimental, if that makes any sense. But for us, they were, with each game, we deliberately wanted to kind of step out of our creative comfort zone and do something that felt a lot different from the last thing that we did. Not because we didn't, we loved and continue to love the world of Bastion and the world of each of our games, for that matter. It's just that faced with the faced with the decision to like, well, do you just go make Bastion 2 because people like Bastion, or do you go make something else because did you think that you were just going to be the Bastion company, or do you have other ideas? We set out, we loved kind of the world building and the experimentation, the design experimentation that went into Bastion. So we wanted to see if we could basically do it again for Transistor, but wiping the slate clean. So with Pyre, we learned a lot. I think we learned a lot about how to work together effectively, and we learned that sort of by the end of the project, because it was a really challenging project, because we'd never had like a real kind of pre-production phase on one of our games, because it was just like Amir and Gavin on Bastion, and but on Transistors, like the whole team was there from the start. So the game was kind of being pushed and pulled in more directions at the beginning, and that led to new like challenges and discovery. I mean, it was, for me personally, it was a very tough project. I think the toughest of the Supergiant projects for me, if I had to pick one. And then Pyre, we sort of responded to our experience on Transistor by letting everyone just kind of run free and do their thing, and we'll kind of figure out how to pull it all together as part of the process. And we wanted to take kind of an even bigger, again, make something even more different. Because Transistor was a big hit, in some ways an even bigger hit than Bastion for us. And so we thought that, like, if we're gonna do something wild, now's the time. Yeah, let's try it. And so we didn't know what the game was gonna be, but we love the, talking to Amir in the early days, this idea of like the moment of like retirement in athletics, like how do you, as the star of the team, when do you make the decision to sort of hang it up? Because on the one hand, the team needs you, on the other hand, you don't want to sort of
overstay your welcome.
Overstay your welcome, exactly. And also on the flip side, saying goodbye to an old friend, like that kind of experience. And so those were some of the formative ideas, like kind of the kind of spiritual ideas, I would say, behind Pyre. But that game, was another 3-year project. We learned, I think, like we learned a lot about our kind of, it did push us like creatively kind of even farther. And at the end of those 3 games, now we had been working together for about 10 years, actually. Now we could finally take stock of like, okay, how do we work well together? What do we actually enjoy doing? What are we actually good at? Do we really want to keep sort of resetting every single time and learning everything from scratch every time? Because that is really hard, and there is a risk that that the industry will pass us by. Like, I would draw the analogy of like, hey, we could make like a narrative racing game, for example. Like, we could make a racing game with a story, and maybe that would be really cool. But you know what? It's going to be a pretty lousy racing game compared to like what the Forza team or something has been doing, because they've been perfecting their craft at making racing games.
The actual driving part of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like we need to we need to sort of stay on top of our craft. And if we just discard all of our past ideas every time we start a new project, it's like we're just sort of tying one of our arms behind our backs. And moreover, we liked doing some of the stuff on Bastion, Transistor, and Pyre. Why don't we keep doing some of the stuff that we actually enjoyed doing? So Hades was built around some of those ideas. Hey, let's take, the action of Bastion, let's take the atmosphere and sort of like the sort of combat depth of Transistor. Let's take the multi-character, like sort of ensemble cast storytelling and narrative techniques of Pyre and mash all that up. So that still sounds like it's a whole new thing, but it was at least building on things we knew we knew how to do.
And it absolutely is. Yeah. I agree 1,000%. Hades is your first 3 games, the best parts of your first 3 games, squeezed down to its essence into one project.
Yeah, I'm glad it comes across that way. Yeah, it was certainly a compelling idea at the start of that project. It's like, why are we making this
Why are we forcing ourselves to reinvent the wheel every time we work on a game?
Yeah, even like the brief story from Transistor is like, it's another, isometric action RPG. It has some similarities to Bastion, of course.
Yeah.
But that was not, we spent so much time like re-examining those assumptions. We tried all sorts of different camera angles, all sorts of different sort of ways of navigating the spaces before finally coming back to like, okay, it's going to be isometric. You're going to run around. So it's like, it doesn't look like it should have been that hard, but that's an example of, the degree to which we were really stressing the idea that this has to be its own unique thing. It should not really be similar to our past work, to stand on its own 2 feet. But yeah,
here's the thing about Hades to me is it is a genre like roguelikes. I have never really resonated with that subgenre at all. I've tried them all. People have said, this is the one. This is the one that you need to play. This is the one that's going to change your mind. None of them ever did until this one.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Story can be a powerful tool in games. I think that's been, that was another thing. Like that was us, actually, to go back to something you said earlier, I personally did notice that each of our games was like threatened to be, it was like more esoteric than the last. That was the word I would use.
Yeah.
Transistor was kind of a headier, weirder game than Bastion. And then Pyre is a weirder game in a lot of ways than Transistor. And I'm like, is this really what we want?
Is this the path we're going to take?
Yeah. If you start to plot this out, do we want to just get weirder and weirder every time? And to me, the answer is no. Like, because what worked about Bastion, I thought, was that it, on the face of it, it's this very simple game with a lot of pick up and play appeal. Oh, cool. You just start playing, you run around, you hit stuff, fine. Mm-hmm. And then the part where it's an interesting game hopefully washes over you once you've started kind of coming to grips with it. So the part where it could be very simple to get into is not at odds with the part where it can be like very interesting and compelling. So with Hades, that was one of the things that we deliberately wanted to go back to. Just get the player into the action immediately. You shouldn't need, an elaborate tutorial to even understand what the heck you're doing. It should be pretty intuitive. And then from there, the parts that are interesting about it should just start to reveal themselves. So I'm glad that, that certainly worked out for us on this game. And and like we may have some fans that like hoped that we would just get weirder and weirder and more experimental every time. I think that those weird ideas find their way into our games. Like there's a lot of wacky stuff in Hades. It's just not there right in your face at the beginning.
It's not as overt. Yeah.
Yeah. To make it so that, because I think that those qualities are easier to appreciate once you're already
absorbed into the game.
Yeah, exactly. So then we have some license to kind of mess with the format and so on. And then the other thing from Bastion is that realization that like story can, when you weave the story into this kind of game structure, it's just another way in which it can be compelling to try and move forward. Because roguelikes are usually purely about the mechanics and the challenge, but it's like they also are games that wipe all your progress away every time you die. So it can be really deflating to get to those moments. And yet what's interesting about those games is the part where you restart and everything is different. So we thought a lot about how to make the inevitable moment of death in those games something that you don't like feel horrible about.
That to me was the big difference.
Yeah.
With Hades. Now you said earlier that development teams know what they're shipping.
Yeah.
Did you know what you were shipping with Hades? Did you know it was going to become what it's become, a game of the year?
Yeah. No. So I guess I'm contradicting myself. Geez. Like we've been really fortunate to have made these, like our past games have all achieved a level of success, including critical success. Like Pyre, got like a 9.7 out of 10 from IGN and stuff like that.
Yeah, I really liked it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a well, like all of our games they've all reviewed like pretty similarly kind of. So with Hades, especially since it was in early access and we were like getting player feedback, I came to realize what became clear was that it was definitely our biggest game. And then we were hearing from players that, more and more players were like, oh, this is my favorite game that they've made. We're like, cool. That's because that's a quality we look for.
That's what you want to hear. You want to build, right?
We don't try to like surpass our past games each time, but we want for each game to have the ability to be someone's favorite game of ours, if that makes sense. So I personally thought that Hades was likely, kind of a marginally better game than our past work. But again, like the standards are, it's 3 years later, the standards are higher. It is like it reviewed not just like it reviewed like wildly better than our previous games. So that was very unexpected to me personally. But I, as someone who is like, just, I don't know, like I think the standards are so high. I play AAA games as well as independent games. I'm like regularly kind of blown away and mystified. I play these games like Ghost of Tsushima. It's like, how did human beings like make this stuff?
I know, it's pretty amazing.
So the part where Hades ended up, going toe to toe against these games and Game of the Year awards is not something I expected. And also, like, another dimension of it is you don't, you can control the quality of your own work. You have no say over the kind of context in which it's released. And Hades came out in September. Usually, like some, while like more games come out of the woodwork in the fall, like something like, in some alternate reality, Cyberpunk, came out when it was supposed to, and
right,
got,
which would probably not even be yet.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, like if it was supposed to, like everyone thought it was going to be the big game last year, the game that would get 10 out of 10s from everybody and all this kind of stuff. So like, there's some alternate reality where that happened and Hades got completely overshadowed,
right,
by other releases. But we just, it somehow broke through and just really resonated with people more than we could have expected. So
the other thing too is you have early access now, which is, back in the day, it wasn't a thing like it is now. No. So in a lot of cases, you have a game that you're creating that's out there before it's even really finished. And you're getting all the feedback on the unfinished product, but it, in some ways, maybe it diminishes the day that the game is officially released, right? And does that concern you at all while you're working on games? Are you like, wait, like people have been talking about this and playing it for a while. Maybe when the official quote unquote release date comes, it doesn't have the punch or the impact that maybe we would hope it would have.
Yeah, it wasn't like it wasn't a concern per se, in part because the game was already a success in early access. So basically the way we talked ourselves out of the concern was like, even if nobody gives a crap about our 1.0 launch, we still did fine.
Yeah.
Like we still did okay. We're still going to be able to make another game.
Yep.
So we basically, that helped us sort of lower our expectations.
Interesting.
For the 1.0 launch. We don't make like, I don't know. We've never made, super precise predictions about the outcome of these things. But like we also knew that our major updates in early access were times when we'd get more players and interest. So we did expect that our 1.0 could do pretty well. And we were also launching on Switch for the first time. So we were like all crossing our fingers for that, how that would go. But it like wildly exceeded our most optimistic sort of hopes and dreams about it. Because to your point, the game had been out there and yet people, I'll take it obviously, but it was treated like this kind of out of left field surprise, when it was ironic to me because we were working so hard to like market our updates, for close to 2 years, trying to get the word out about this game. And it's like, what is this strange new Hades game? It's like, well, fine with me. I'm happy with the outcome. But,
now, why Switch? We hear a lot of people who don't work in development. We hear, anecdotally that indie games sell so much better on Switch. One, is that true? And is that why you guys decided to go with Switch first?
They, some of them have, is what I would say.
Okay.
Some smaller independent games have found a really happy home there, and sort of stick around in the bestseller charts really persistently. Games, I think the ones that come to mind immediately are Hollow Knight, Stardew Valley, Celeste, games like that. So these happen to be fantastic games. They've been very successful on Steam also. But yeah, there's something like the Switch is just a really, really good device for playing these kind of like for playing games that are like quick to get into that way. Just these kind of like it makes these games feel like new, because we even brought, Bastion and Transistor to the Switch, and it just something about it
You don't
felt
play
really
it on the
good to have in that
go.
format.
Makes a
Yeah,
big
exactly.
difference.
So
Yeah.
with Hades, part of it was the speculation that maybe this game could do well here, and also it just felt really well suited to the format, because we, as mentioned, we designed it in such a way that you could get into the action immediately, play it in bite-sized chunks if you want, or
Yep.
marathon it however you want to slice it. So it just seemed like it would be a natural fit there, and that's why we and we'd never launched one of our games on a Nintendo platform before there was some kind of appeal.
Well, you're not alone.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
I mean, let's be honest. I mean, Switch has been a revelation for Nintendo and for a
yeah,
lot of developers, I believe. So
yeah. I think really well deserved. I think it's a fantastic system.
it's a great
It's
platform for
great to
sure.
use. Yeah.
So now that you guys have your legitimate bona fide smash hit, I mean, your other games did well financially, but Hades, I'm sure, without asking you specifically how well it's done financially, is your biggest hit. How does a small team like that look at a hit like that? Do you guys say to yourselves, oh, wow, we can build a much bigger team now. We can start doing bigger games. Do you look at it like, hey, maybe we can start poking around in like bigger budget games now and start doing things like Assassin's Creed? Or do you say, you know what? This is just proof of concept for us that we need to stay in our lane and keep doing what we're doing?
Yeah, I think it's more the latter thing that you said. We don't the great thing about the success of Hades is it reinforces to us that we can stick together and keep doing what we're doing, essentially. And we that doesn't mean that we want, like, we will probably continue to grow like a little bit, but I don't see us
Suddenly
that
exploding
means
to
like
300 people.
yeah, exactly. That means, maybe we'll end up at, I don't know, like 25 people as opposed to
Right.
20 or something like that. But we have no, like, being small is just fundamental to how we operate. It constrains what we could do, but we like the constraints. The constraints actually give rise to the kind of ideas that we've had and the kind of solutions that we've had. Things like the narration in Bastion are born of constraints, of just like what can we do with the resources that we have. And so if that means that it like limits the kind of things that we could do, it really does. It means that it's unlikely that we will go on to make some whatever like big, that the next thing from us is going to be some wild like AAA type of experience. Having said that, I don't know what the future holds. It's just the way we talk about it is things are in many ways business as usual, with the like reinforcement that what we have been doing is sound in some way, that our efforts in this have been so rewarded, I guess, like that our work has received so much praise. So why would we want to change everything about how we made something like this happen? Why would we do that? We don't want to do that. We want, like, for my part personally, I want to keep doing, or I wish I could, devote even more percent of my time to it. But like, the kind of work we do individually is the kind of work we want to keep doing. So, and knowing that people like the outcome of that work, great. So that's so I think yeah, it's funny because I mean I think we don't have a lot of ambition in that way. We just want to keep Darren and Amir, they actually were in bands together. They draw an analogy to bands. It's like, if a band has a big album, they don't like triple the size of the band.
They don't add a bunch of new players to the band.
They just go and try and make a different, another album that's worth a damn. We also tell ourselves, I think we're very we've always tried to avoid falling into the trap of like, let's make our next game even better than our last one. Because like I said, if we hear from people that, whatever, Pyre is their favorite game, they got a tattoo of it, like, we're not going to tell them that, oh, well, Hades is even better than Pyre. like they love Pyre. That's great.
That's funny.
Yeah. So we just want to make games that are up to our own standard, have that capacity to be someone's favorite game of ours. And we know that it is very possible, very likely that that Hades might well have been our high point. We should not
You
expect
shouldn't say
that.
that.
No, but I mean, this
You
is
guys
just my
have built with
disposition.
every game. I mean,
We
why
have,
would you think that can't continue?
I would say, just from like a success, from like a uh audience, critical success standpoint, like from like
It's hard
a
to beat.
game.
I mean, once you get a Game of the Year candidate, it's going to be hard to
Exactly.
top. Yeah.
It's won more than 50 Game of the Year awards already. Basically, it's like we just should not go into any new endeavor expecting that, well, we will get 100 Game of the Year awards this time.
Yeah.
I personally think that that's not a good. I don't think that that's a healthy mindset personally, and I would rather. It's not that this game is I don't think that this game is like a fluke for us, because it was built in such a deliberate way. And the ways, the things it gets recognized for are the things that we did focus on. But still, we can't just, we can't just expect that we can keep sort of that this is the beginning of like a series and monstrous successes. We don't even need,
few
like,
studios can say that has ever happened. I mean, they have a Game of the Year, and then their next game is Game of the Year, and then their next game is
no.
It doesn't work that way.
I don't even want that kind of. I don't even necessarily want that kind of pressure. I mean, I'll take it.
It's already there, Greg. What are you talking about?
No, it's fine. Like, we've always, that's been there since after Bastion, right? And
well, that's why your products are good, because you already put that pressure on yourselves to create things of that quality.
Yeah, I think it's just, I think that pressure is good, of like, we spend 3 years working on a thing, or however long it takes. It's just like, I don't know. The thing I always say is that not only does it take the 3 years just to make, but for me at least, it sticks with me forever. Like, here we are talking about Bastion, right? So I'm very motivated to do my damnedest, because I don't want to be stuck. I don't want to be stuck with the regret over what the outcome of it was, because I know that torments me personally. So I want to look back on my work and know that I did everything I personally could, within reason, I guess, to do my best work. And then, at least whatever the reception is, at least I can say I gave it my all, and I'm okay with that. That's kind of my own way of making peace with this stuff.
Greg,
yeah.
What about a sequel? You guys haven't done a sequel, but now you have a Game of the Year. So does that change?
It's we like to surprise. We've considered sequels every.
You don't have to tell
time.
me if it's coming. Like, I'm not trying to like get a hot.
Believe me,
like,
I won't.
I'm not trying to break something here. I'm just saying, like, is your perspective changed? Whereas before, maybe that wasn't even something you consider. Now is it something that you consider?
It hasn't. Our perspective hasn't changed, because it's always been something that we considered.
Okay.
We have. It's funny that we've never made one, because we have, like, I think some of our fans may think, we have like something against them. I think we've never made a sequel, in part because we've been so excited to make something new each time. And also, I have a lot of like fear and respect for sequels. I think sequels are like deceptively, they're like, people think they're like easier than they are. I think to make a good one, like, my fear around sequels is you can just, you can think of like film franchises where the sequel may have like retroactively ruined the first movie for you, or whatever. There's like a big, you have to do right by the thing, and kind of live up to the spirit of it. And a big part of our games is I think what's, people like, our games can be surprising to players, and with a sequel, how can you surprise players again? And I've thought about those kind of issues all through the years. So yeah, it's something we do think about, but I think we do value that element of surprise. So I hope we can keep our players on our toes a little bit, where they won't, when we ourselves don't quite know what we're going to do. I think it's good, because it means, we can surprise ourselves and hopefully surprise our players. And I think surprise is like sort of an underrated aspect of how an undervalued aspect of games. Like when games can surprise you, it's a really big deal. You talk about platformers. That's like a good
for
example.
me especially.
Yeah,
it's a really big deal.
Yeah, for me too. We just try to do things in different ways each time, not for the sake of it, just to keep it interesting for ourselves. It's like we've seen this before, we've done this before. Like that's not, we already did this in Transistor, Pyre, or whatever. So we try to spin things differently. That's another part of the reason I think we've never done a sequel, is it has all those challenges. Like, how are you not just sort of retreading all the same territory? But who knows? The sky is the limit for us right now, and it takes us a long time. We never know what we're going to make next until after we're done working on a thing. So we're just kind of beginning to have some of those conversations now of like, well, what do we even do from here? In part because we've been so busy like supporting Hades since the launch. A fortunate problem to have.
Yep. So Greg, before we go, every guest on 3-Night Weekend, we ask them one set of questions. This weekend, what are you playing? What are you watching? And what are you drinking?
What am I playing? I have been playing Loop Hero a lot.
Okay.
But I think
I'm not surprised to hear that at all.
Yeah, I think I may be done with Loop Hero though, because I kind of got to the point where I'm like, okay, I think I get it, and I feel a little bit burned out on it now. But I played it all this last weekend, so that's why. I have one of the backlog games that has like bubbled up for me a lot is I really want to play Yakuza Like a Dragon, and I've been looking for an excuse to dig into that game. So maybe it's time that I pick that up. What am I watching? Do
you watch a lot of TV and film?
I watch a decent amount, not as much as I should. I've been back on like a freaking anime kick of all things.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've always there's like some interesting stuff out there lately.
Like?
But there's like
what's one thing you would recommend for our listeners?
Well, there's like the big hit show is called Demon Slayer. It's on Netflix. I thought it started really strong the first couple of episodes, and then it's kind of like it's gone into the rut.
That feels like anime in a nutshell to me.
It happens for me. Yeah, but there's So I'm kind of sampling. I'm not that super engaged with it. I'm just kind of sampling stuff that's come out recently, because it seems like a lot of stuff has come out that I've been seeing discussion about. And with WandaVision over, what are we going to watch now? I actually I really want to see that Raya and the Last Dragon movie, the new Disney movie, for $30 on top of your Disney Plus subscription. But it sounds, I actually like Disney's kind of mainline animated movies. They're ever since Tangled, they've mostly been on like I think they've had a really good run of their kind of CG animated movies. So
agreed.
So I might see that. And as for what I'm drinking, I think I've been more on the whiskey side of things. I recently.
Are you a big Scotch guy?
Not really. I never have been, but I went to Japan for the first time in like 20 years. It took my whole family. It was the last trip we went on before everything that was like, it was close to 3 years ago now or something. And they there's a drink there that's often served called the highball, which is just whiskey and like club soda basically on ice, and is like, oh wait, this is really good, and it's low calorie and stuff like that. So
at our age, you have to worry about that stuff.
Yeah. So it's all, we still make the highballs around here from time to time, and so that is what I think that is what I will be. And we usually have like a beer or something try to save like a Belgian beer or something for weekends as well. We went to Belgium also some years back, and that was a wonderful.
It's an eye opener. You can't have too many Belgian beers though, or you're gonna.
Yeah, they're pretty
really
intense. Yeah,
absolutely.
Once a week or so.
Yeah. Well, Greg, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been great to catch up with you. I wish I got to bump into you more often, but typically when two people work really hard, you don't run into those two people don't run into each other all that often. Again, I appreciate everything you did for me throughout my career. I still to this day, when I'm thinking about things editorially, I will still hear your voice in my head when I think about certain things. I mean, that's the type of impact that you've had on my career. So thank you very much. And most importantly, congratulations on all the success at Supergiant. And I cannot wait to see what you guys do next.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
If you want to reach out to Greg, you can find him on Twitter at Kasavin. That's Kasavin. And now that you know what he's up to this weekend, it's time to figure out things for yourself.
Games!
Ooh, it's a slow weekend for video games, so maybe you should just go pick up Valheim on Steam for $20. But if not, there is Crash Bandicoot 4. It's about time. It is launching for Switch, PS5, and Xbox Series X today.
TV and film!
Likewise, if you're looking to plant your butt on the couch this weekend, maybe it's a good time for you to head out and get some fresh air. We can all probably use a little bit of that right now. There are a few things worth checking out, though. Isabel Season 1 launches on HBO Max this weekend. It is a docuseries about a popular Chilean writer. Next up is Cosmic Sin with Bruce Willis. It's launching on VOD this weekend, and the best way you can describe it is kind of like Aliens without the name. Boy, what is Bruce doing these days? It's crazy. Next up is a movie called Cherry that's premiering on Apple TV. It stars Tom Holland as an Iraq war vet with PTSD who becomes a bank robber. It's been getting a lot of positive buzz from critics. Definitely worth checking out. Also on Netflix this weekend, a new series called The One debuts, and it's about using your DNA to find your perfect soulmate. And then finally, if you got sucked in by WandaVision on Disney Plus over the last month and a half or so, the making of that series is also premiering on Disney Plus.
Music!
If you're into heavy music or metal, it is a good week of album releases for you, probably the biggest of which is Rob Zombie. His first album in 6 years is releasing today. It's called The Lunar Injection Kool-Aid Eclipse Conspiracy. That's a mouthful, but one thing I will say is it is a return to form for Rob Zombie. It's really heavy, some light electronics, but for the most part, definitely going to get your head ringing. And then there's also a band called I Hate God, and that's spelled E-Y-E, Hate God, all one word. Its new album is called A History of Nomadic Behavior. It's kind of slower, chuggy metal, like Rage Against the Machine, so check that out. And then on the indie front, there's a band called The Anchoress, and their new album called The Art of Losing is kind of like electro rock with female vocals and strong social messaging as well. That's out today. And then finally, Valerie June. She's a singer-songwriter in the vein of Alabama Shakes, just with a little bit more R&B and soul influence. Her new album is also out today.
Sports!
Lots of sports going on this weekend, not the least of which is a ton of NCAA basketball. In fact, if you don't like NCAA basketball, it's a terrible weekend for live sports. There are tons of conference tournaments going on all weekend long, trying to figure out who's going to get into the final round for March Madness. And that's across ESPN, CBS Sports, NBC, pretty much everywhere. You're not going to be able to escape college basketball this weekend. But there are other things going on as well. Let's see, there's not a single nationally televised NBA game on today, which is a huge rarity. They're just kind of getting out of the way for March Madness stuff. But there is a really good NHL game on tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern on NHL Network. It's the Vegas Golden Knights at the St. Louis Blues, two of the leaders in their division. Moving on to Saturday, even Premier League soccer has been pared down a little bit for this weekend. It's 7:25 a.m. Eastern. It's Leeds United versus Chelsea. And then at 9:55 a.m., it's Crystal Palace versus West Brom. Both those games are on NBCSN. And for the first time in weeks, there's not a single nationally televised game on NBC from the Premier League. Then at 7 p.m. Eastern on NBA TV, it's the Pistons at the Nets. But again, on Saturday, not a single nationally televised NBA game. If you're into golf, the 2021 Players' Championship, the third round kicks off on NBC at 1 p.m. And then in the evening, my Pittsburgh Penguins take on the Buffalo Sabres at 7 p.m. Eastern on NHL Network. Moving on to Sunday, again, two Premier League soccer games going on early on in the day on NBCSN. Arsenal versus Tottenham is at 12:25 Eastern, and Manchester United versus West Ham United is going down at 3:10 Eastern. And then the final round of the Players' Championship kicks off at 1 p.m. on NBC if you're into some golf. And then finally, there are some big NBA games going on Sunday, and there is a national game, which is the Los Angeles Clippers at the New Orleans Pelicans at 9 p.m. Eastern. And then if you're into the NHL, the surprising Los Angeles Kings take on the Colorado Avalanche at 7 p.m. Eastern on NBCSN. And then if you like the perpetual left-hand turn, the NASCAR Instacart 500 is happening on Fox at 3:30 p.m. Eastern.
Esports.
4 big tournaments are going on this weekend. The Valorant VCT Masters 1 Stage 1 Europe is going on all weekend. The 2021 Hearthstone Master Tour Iron Forge is also going on all weekend. The Fortnite Champion Series Chapter 2 Season 5 worth $2.7 million is happening all weekend. And then finally, the Rainbow Six Siege Japan League is going down on Saturday and Sunday, and the purse there is $305K. All right, that's it. Thanks for checking out 3-Night Weekend from Sifted Games at sifted.net. If you want to get it when it's hot and fresh, head to patreon.com/sifted and give us a pledge. If you give us $4 a month or more, you'll get this every Friday morning. If you want to know when the show is posted for free, follow us on Twitter at Sifted Games. And if you want to reach out to me and suggest future guests, you can find me at Dinfire. I'm Shane Satterfield reminding you that every weekend is a 3-Night Weekend.